I shall hand over to Christina.
Yeah, so hi everyone, nice to meet the new people, and hello again to everyone who was here last week. Unfortunately, the weather, it feels weird that last week we were like, it's so sunny and we're stuck inside, and now I've got my like Aran jumper on, but that's the way it is. So yeah, today we'll be looking at media and press stuff, and then next week the workshop is on social media, so some of the stuff you guys suggested might be more linked to that. And if you have anything you want to chat about with social media, particularly maybe if you message Becca in advance, and then I can try make sure we cover those things if that's good. So I'll share my screen now. Can you all see that? Oh, the wrong one. Right. So I've just started with a very, I guess basic question, but what are you trying to use the media for? Because based on all the projects you guys have talked about and different things, there's lots of different things you might want to do. So it might be to recruit new participants. So for instance, for one of your gardening programs, or to do that, to help with that map or something. Similar to what you were saying, the last person, that like to show what good work is being done in the area, to demonstrate the value of what you're doing. You may want to be doing that to show a funder. Potentially funders like to see media coverage, or it might be, you know, to promote an event or to promote a campaign. But I think it always helps me when I'm trying to develop the press release and the key messages to think about exactly what I'm trying to use it for. Because I'll like approach it a different way, and I think it will make it a bit clearer. So I think that's a good like first question. So then I kind of always ask myself, like, what's the key message? So if I, you know, talking to a journalist very quickly over the phone, what's the first thing I want to get across? Or what do I want kind of at the top of the email or the top of the press release? And then in pitching to the media, the question we get at, or we get told sometimes a lot of the time, is like, what's the story? So, you know, oftentimes we'll work really hard on a report and be like, this is groundbreaking. And the media will be like, what's the story? So you have to work a bit harder sometimes to like pull out the story. So it was interesting when you said earlier, Richard, sorry, I can't see everyone's faces because I'm looking at the presentation, but that this will be like the first school gardening thing. So that's quite it, like I wouldn't have known that. So that's quite an interesting way of then making that story a lot more, I would say, newsworthy if it's the first, like the first one. And then I think, yeah, and you could take different angles on the same piece of information, and you take it in a lot of different ways. So it could be like, what's your angle? You know, is there research that shows gardening is really good for your mental health? Or the next point I've got is making it relevant. So it could be, you know, a lot of us have started gardening in lockdown. That would be a way of making it more relevant. Yeah, and I think a good way of that, and similar to kind of what you were saying, Charmaine, is sometimes as well, if you can know events that are coming up, you might be able to plan ahead and be like, this would be a good time to pitch this thing. So there's, you know, if it's like World Food Day in October or World Ocean Day in June, the media will often be looking for stories around those things. I mean, an example at the moment is I keep trying to brave watching Seaspiracy because I know they talk about farmed salmon, which is some work I've done, but I know there's dolphins crying and I'm too scared to watch it. But I have seen loads of pieces off the back of that. So I was like, okay, I might be able to, journalists that we've tried to engage on the farmed salmon campaign we have before haven't written about it, but now they've written about Seaspiracy. So maybe that's a way to engage them and be like, as you may have seen in Seaspiracy about farmed salmon. So it's about like, yeah, what's kind of in the public sphere at the moment, what are people talking about? And then when I was talking to my colleague Jess, she suggested that for local media, you don't always need a press release, that sometimes it can be better to just ring them and like have a chat with them and ask if they'd want to like send someone to an event you're having or meet up for a coffee or something. So it can be sometimes useful to go a more informal route like that with a local media. So the press release, then if you are doing one, and I know we're going to do a sample press release as part of the Food Citizens Toolkit as well. So I've said you want to make sure the heading gets the point across. So that's similar to, I think, like what the key message is and what the thing is. And it is tricky. Like I used to work at the BBC and write stuff, and we would write all these different things and try to find all these different angles, and the answer would always be like to eat a balanced diet. So I remember like the thing I did that was on the BBC homepage that did the best was like, what do you eat for a good night's sleep? And shocker, the key is just to eat a balanced diet. But it got a lot of clicks because people, no one's getting enough sleep except maybe Sheila can share her secrets. But so I think sometimes it's maybe thinking that's a bit like clickbaity, but it's thinking about things like that of like, is there a way you can maybe get the point across or make people interested with the heading that mightn't be directly related to what it is. Then you want to have the date on it. Is it embargoed? So sometimes if we do a research report, we might send it to people earlier so they can like get before the report is finalized and published. So people can get their head around it, but be like, you can't publish this until X date. And it's good to make that really clear. That mightn't be as relevant to you have an event or something, but it might be, you know, you still might have a quote or something that someone doesn't want to say until X thing is out. So it's just to try and make that really clear up the top. Try to keep it short. Imagine that the person is probably skim reading it and doesn't have a lot of time. So you don't want to have it excessively long. We found it really useful to give quotes people can use, and then even if they don't take everything, they can take some. So when someone is like, feedback is the best organization I've ever dealt with, they can just take that. They can take that directly, and you can give more than one quote. We normally give like 2 or 3, so we might have one from the executive director and one for someone directly related to the project, depending on what it is. And I think it helps as well in terms of kind of creating that story and stuff to give like numbers and specific details. So rather than being too vague and saying, you know, we have this allotment program, like how many people are in it, how many volunteers do you have, information like I was saying earlier, like this is the first program of this kind in the school system. I think the details like that can make it more vivid and like more like a story for people rather than, you know, because there's allotments or whatever or cooking classes all the time, but it's like what specifically about your project or what you're doing might catch someone's eye and might make it a bit more interesting. You want to provide your contact details, usually an email and a number, and then references to any, if you've mentioned any research or you've pointed to anything in it, you want to like show where that's come, and then you might want to give some notes to the editor at the end. I can show a sample press release if that's useful, or yeah, okay, let me just stop sharing this and share that. Okay, so this was one that our Gleaning Network in Kent did. And it's just, yeah, volunteers help rescue over 100,000 potatoes from going to waste on Kent Farm. So that one says for immediate release, it doesn't have an embargo. And then, yeah, it has a quote down here from our unfortunately now past gleaning coordinator in Kent. So she said, "This is a whopping glean, one of the biggest we've ever run. It's a huge shame that Jeff can't get the price he deserves for his potatoes, and there's so much fruit and veg is going to waste on farms like Jeff's across the UK, but we're excited to get so many volunteers out to help rescue the potatoes and get them to good causes." So I feel like that quote's kind of doing a lot. It's saying, you know, that it's a really, that this is actually quite a lot of potatoes because we've experienced dealing with them, and then it's pointing out that farmers, you know, face these issues. They've also pointed some research from us about how much food goes to waste every year. So again, that's using kind of stats or numbers to bring it a bit more alive. So showing that research from Feedback estimates that enough food to feed the population of Birmingham or Manchester for a year is generated on farms every year. And that's also something like journalists will like just being able to pull that out and either put that somewhere near the top or as the heading or something. And then when I was talking about having references, it's just if you see the like dot there, we have all them at the bottom. So if you talk about any research or you're talking about anything, you should say show them where it's come from. And yeah, and then down here, this is just like some information for the notes to editors about like when exactly the glean will be happening, if they want to send a photographer or something like that, so they have some notice. and a little bit more about the Gleaning Network in terms of who funds it and how it's run. So you might need to check your funding stuff. Sometimes you might have to do that because we've got the like funders logos and stuff there as well. Yeah, so I will stop sharing that and go back to the other one. So the next one I have is preparing for interviews. I know Becca did a very long interview for Box recently. The thing I find helpful is to just get as much info as you can about the interview in advance. So like what exactly they want to cover, roughly how long the interview will be. There's a very big difference if it's say a 5-minute or 15 minutes. You'll know sometimes based on the show what type of interview it's going to be. So whether it's going to be kind of combative and they're going to ask you really difficult questions, or it's like a debate and you're going to be talking with someone else, or if it's going to be a more like fluffy show where they're just, you know, you're just going to get to promote your project. But I think, yeah, you want to know, I sometimes when I get a bit nervous about doing interviews, I just then go back to thinking like, okay, but what exactly is this interview for? And then that helps me prepare for it. Then I, similar to what I was saying earlier, come up with a few key messages. I draft a document with those kind of messages in them and some key stats that I want to get across. And then this one, even though it can feel weird, is like practicing with someone I find helps, because you know the way sometimes you go to say something and it's like your brain, just the words don't come out of your mouth properly and you're like, I swear I can talk like a human normally. And I find that even if it's just literally responding to similar questions over and over again. So it might be like, what is the Box Food Partnership? And that seems like a really easy question, but if you haven't, yeah, Rebecca's like, no. But if you haven't prepped an answer and they ask you on radio, you might be like, it's a partnership about food. I don't know. Or like, why are allotments important or something? So I find the more I practice, and just normally I just do it with a colleague, but I mean, do it with whoever. I think then I'm not really nervous about those things in the interview, and you're able to be a bit more relaxed. And then even if something comes up you weren't expecting, at least you'll know that you've got all that stuff kind of covered. And then during the interview, I've just written to pause. I think sometimes you kind of think that like you have to respond straight away or have a perfect answer for everything, but actually I try to treat it as much as I can like a normal conversation. And in a normal conversation, if someone asked you like a confusing question or something, you might be like, ask them to clarify, or you might take a moment to reflect on what you want to say. So that's fine to do that. And then I've written to pivot, which is basically when you've come up with your 3 key messages, that those are the things you want to get across all the time. So then if they ask you something that isn't really related to those, you want to try answer in a way that's going to bring it back to that. I've got a video, which hopefully I did the thing you told me, Becca, so the sound will work after. So hopefully we can, one of my colleagues do that. And then I've just written remember to breathe, because I think sometimes it can be easy to get stressed in an interview, and I just sometimes have to be like, just breathe and it's fine. So let me see if I can. So this is our one of our staff in Liverpool who's been doing a media frenzy recently, but I thought this was a good interview in terms of her key messages and stuff. So I'll just open this. I'll have to stop share and share again.
Being provided during the pandemic.
Can you hear that?
Concerns were first raised after a number of parents posted images of food parcels they'd received on social media. One picture showed a £30 package containing food actually thought to be just worth over £5. So let's talk to food security campaigner Lucy Antel. Morning to you. I mean, clearly we don't know at this stage how widespread these sort of examples are that we've seen on social media, but if this proves to be the case, that people are getting £5 worth of food where they're meant to be getting 30, that's pretty shocking, isn't it?
It's appalling, and the question we have to start asking ourselves is who exactly is profiting from poverty?
Well, of course, the government says it is asking those very questions. Obviously, contracted people to provide these parcels, and they're expecting better.
They are expecting better, but another question I suppose that I have for the government is who is overseeing the contents of those parcels? They have guidelines on their website, but if without enforcement or without checks, it's a bit pointless, really.
I suppose, I don't know quite how these things work on this scale, but if contracts are signed, then you would expect those contracts to be fulfilled. Clearly, with this coming to light, the government has said it is not happy.
No, indeed, as it shouldn't be, although I have noticed there's been one or two MPs trying to defend this on different programmes yesterday. But to me, it is indefensible because the most vulnerable children in our society should be supported and not exploited.
I mean, it seems remarkable that people would think this amount of food to last for however many days it's meant to, it would be adequate for a family.
Well, it is intended to be for the child, but if you look at what's actually in there, there's a suggestion that there would be sufficient food for lunches, and from what I can tell, that would be basically 8 days of plain bread and cheese as a sandwich, with maybe a bit of fruit if it lasted that long. I'm not quite sure what the tomato's there for.
No, or quite what's going to happen with a couple of carrots, really. It just seems so. I think this is what's caused some of the outrage on social media, and obviously the comments from Marcus Rashford, who's proving to be a bit of a hero with all of these issues, is that it just beggars belief. Some of the stuff seems so absolutely random.
Well, indeed, that's what I mean when I say there should be some oversight into what's going into these parcels. The idea from the government website is that they say that there are significant benefits in providing food parcels and that they have confidence that there would be a nutritious and varied range of food. And as we can see from that example, and also many, many examples that have been put on social media over the last couple of days, that just isn't the case. And unfortunately, from what I can see, this is not the first time that this company has been engaged in substandard provision. There has been a case in Bristol back in March. There was complaints from Eastern Academy about what was being provided. We've also seen the Good Law Project, who started asking questions about what was provided in the shielding parcels that were given out earlier in the year. So I think really somebody needs to take some responsibility a bit further up the food chain, if you'll excuse the pun, to check on what is actually being handed out and what is being given to support vulnerable people.
I mean, would it be better to revert back to vouchers?
Well, in many cases, schools, particularly, for example, where I am, which is in Merseyside in Liverpool, have said that they are going back to the voucher system because it offers a much better choice and also, more importantly, some dignity to the families to be able to choose what it is they feed their children.
How important is that sort of level of dignity to be able to make your own choice?
It's massive. It's massive. There's always this kind of idea that people who are having to claim free school meals or having to resort to food banks are in some way feckless or shiftless or whatever it might be, but they're not. They're just desperate, and we've seen more and more people, particularly in the last sort of 6 to 8 months, the explosion in people having to make sure that that's done with as much care and attention, because it could be you tomorrow.
Lucy, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm sure I don't know if our colleague Lucy will be delighted with us sharing that. Sorry. Yeah. But I think what I think she did a really good job of was, firstly, she had a really good kind of opening line key message, which was like, who's profiting from poverty? And that was like quite a, she knew that she was going to say that. And then every time they try to kind of ask her something else, she brings it back to, it's like the government's responsibility. So when they're like, oh, but the government seems shocked at this, she's like, well, when you go on the government's website, it says there's got, so she's done her research, she's done her prep, and she knows the points she wants to get across. And even when they try to maybe bring it a slightly different direction, she's able to get it back on track. And I think it can be nice, because I think we've all had that fear in an interview where they bring up something and you're like, crap, I haven't read that. And so the fact that you can tell she's clearly been on the website, she probably has read it more than some of the government. And obviously you can't read everything, but if you can prep the key things that might come up, I think that can be really, and you know that stuff. yeah, that hopefully will, you don't have to do a very quick coming up with something in your brain. So next then I've done visuals. We talked a lot about images and stuff last week, but that local media like visuals, that sometimes it can be quite good to invite a local MP and councillor and take they like photo ops. And then I've said you can get creative with photos as well. So I'll give an embarrassing example of me for this one, in that I dressed up like the Tooth Fairy, that's me, outside a AGM to highlight complaining about British sugar, basically. So it's just this idea that you can kind of create maybe something that will be a bit more media friendly. So that's our other colleague Martin there is all standing next to a skip of food waste outside Tesco. So those things can kind of maybe make a story a bit more appealing to a paper or something, if they have this visual to go along with it. Also, we obviously just saw that visual of the free school meals. Like, that's such a, I mean, it's an awful image, but it's a simple image in terms of setup. But sometimes something like that can be really, really striking and get a lot of traction. And that's obviously a lot of food going to waste. So similar to what we talked about last week, you might think about, what visuals can you offer that might help bring the story more to life, or, catch someone's attention, even if it's a bit silly, like dressing up like the Tooth Fairy. Then I've got to focus on the human aspect, particularly I think if you're trying to get across bigger things sometimes, like obviously at feedback, we're often trying to talk about environmental things, which can be hard sometimes to get across. So trying to use case studies, I've just written, make sure you get permission. We found that particularly useful in terms of food waste with farmers. So like having a particular farmer speak to the media, going to that farm, taking pictures. Again, it just, rather than saying, it sounds a lot to say X amount of food is wasted on farms, but then if you have quotes from a farmer saying it's really, really tough when we have to destroy our crops, and you have pictures of them in the field next to the crops they're gonna have to waste, that can be a lot more meaningful. And then, like I said earlier, quotes can be useful. Sometimes you mightn't be able to, get a journalist to go to a farm or something, but you might get quotes from someone, could be from volunteers or people who've done any of your programs, that might, again, help to kind of bring to life what exactly the program's doing. So for gleaning, we've had people beyond just saying, it was really good for my mental health. I hadn't been outside in ages and I met lots of nice people. And again, that can just kind of create a bit more of a story. I've just put in something about letters to the editor. Feels very old-fashioned, but we've had some success recently at feedback with writing letters to the editor. And I think it's kind of sometimes an overlooked way of getting messages into media. And also something I did, which was not part of feedback, was part of another campaign. I'm from Ireland and at home, but where someone just literally got the email address for like every single like local paper in Ireland and created a document for it, and then created a template and would ask our supporters or volunteers to write letters to others. And then they didn't have to go look for the email and to do any of that. And they could literally go like I could look at Cork, like my county, and then you can be like, as someone who grew up in Cork or whatever, to make it a bit more, and actually got quite a lot of letters into the paper around that time. So I think that can be a way, and it can be a kind of simple thing to maybe ask a volunteer to do as well. So I think that can be something that'd be good. I've also put in alternative media. Obviously, like stuff like podcasts now can have a massive reach, especially food podcasts. There's loads of them at the moment, and some of them are really popular. It's not necessarily easy to get on them, but sometimes it might be, pitching, emailing a podcast and talking to them might be more useful than depending on what you're trying to do, than being in a certain newspaper or something. Similarly, like a lot of influencers do Q&As on their Instagrams, or let people host on their Instagrams. We're also going to be talking about social media next week. That was something we were doing in first lockdown, and oftentimes did get like 200 people watching them or something. So again, it's just thinking about sometimes more alternative ways you could do it. And then there's a lot at the moment, so it feels like more food specific media. So I don't know if people have seen, there's that like Vittles, which is that new online food journal that came out in lockdown, and there's other stuff. So sometimes if you have a particular story, maybe that's Nigella Lawson reads it and tweets about it, so that might be something maybe a bit more niche, depending on what the story is, might be a good way to go for a certain thing. Yeah. And then I just put there, like, kind of like, you know, think about where do you get your news from? Because oftentimes for a lot of people, they're not necessarily buying newspapers now, they're not doing that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way to get your message across. And I said, obviously we'll talk about social media next week. But yeah, that's a kind of whistle stop tour if anyone has any questions or anything.
I've got one about like contacting counsellors. So it's a little bit in between maybe a press release and an email. How would you go best about contacting sort of a county councillor, maybe about a campaign or about a project that you're running in their area? Is there a particular way that may be best to go about that?
I mean, I think kind of similar rules would apply. You want to get their attention at the top. I guess you want to highlight as much, like, I'm a boxer, you know, to kind of make it relevant to them. And then I suppose be very clear what you're asking them to do. Like, do you want them to just come to an event, take a photograph? Do you want their support in another way? Because I think sometimes, I haven't had to deal with much counsellors, but I've emailed a lot of different chefs kind of over time of feedback. And sometimes I want them to like cook for me at an event, which is obviously a bigger ask. But sometimes I'm like, I literally just want you to say you support this campaign, which they might be much quicker to do. So I think making it really clear, like what level of kind of commitment you need from them. Because they might just read and go, actually, okay, I just have to go to this event. And that's a fairly simple way of them engaging with it.
And would you say there's a particular viewpoint to put into a press release if you're wanting to attract volunteers, for example, or people to attend you know, particular events or things you might be doing in the community? Is there a particular stance that works quite well that you could put into a press release that may go into media?
I think you just want to make it sound as like a nice event, which I know sounds really basic, but I think, you know, so if you have quotes from volunteers who said this was really fun, and similarly provide as much information so the person knows, again, exactly, like, is it a full day, is it a half day, like how much is expected of them. See, I remember once an Evening Standard person went on a glean and they wrote this long cover up, but the headline they went with was like, it's back-breaking work. Oh, you're like, for fuck's sake, why did you, like, that's not going to encourage people. And then there was all these nice quotes from volunteers in it, but for some reason they were like, it's back-breaking work, but it's worth it. But so I would try to keep it a bit more positive. And then, yeah, if you can have quotes from volunteers. And similar, you might want to say, like, you can just drop in. It depends on what the volunteering is, so people aren't maybe put off thinking, I need to sign up and come every week. Or, yeah, so I would, yeah, try put it in a way that it's quite positive focused.
I've quite often gone on the radio, and it's a lot of effort to go in and think through what you want to say. And I've never, ever had anything come back to me when I've done things on the radio. And it feels just a bit like a black hole that your voice goes into and nothing ever comes back out. Is that just me? Am I not putting my message across very well? Or
you mean you've never had people like get in touch with you or any follow-up or anything? No. Yeah.
Charmaine, you do the local radio, don't you?
Yeah, I have been on Claire's show a few times. Yeah. And I've had sort of a bit of interest, probably one or two dribs and drabs, people contacting me, but then nothing ever comes of it, like volunteers to come on the greens and things. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I guess something, but it sounds like you're going to do that is to have a very, maybe like similar to what a clear ask of what you would want someone to do after listening. So is it to come on a glean, how they can do that. But yeah, beyond that, I'm not really sure. I guess the other way is to maybe ask if it's a video interview, can you clip it so that one of Lucy we put on YouTube ourselves, so then at least you can use it yourself a lot more, because especially if it's on the BBC idea. Or something, they get taken down after a while. So sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can maybe ask them, like I was on something before Christmas and I asked they would give me a clip of it because it was only going to be online for 30 days. So it's still not simple, but at least you have that yourself to promote on your channels and stuff, and can get that message across a bit more. But yeah, beyond that, I think sometimes it's just a bit of luck, like the right person's listening at the right time, you know. Yeah. I guess the only other thing, which is if you have limited time, is maybe, you know, we had to start doing this more so with being asked to speak at events. And it feels kind of hard, especially when you work at a charity, but to be like, how many people are coming? Like, I don't get out of bed for this. Because we did have problems where people were doing these big presentations and going to events, and there were like 7, 10 people at it, and kind of had to get to a stage where you have to kind of figure out whether it's going to be worth what you're getting back. So I think it's okay to say, like, what is the listener? And I've had people ask me to be on podcasts, and they have said themselves, like, this is our listenership, this is roughly how many people. And then at least if you only have time to do one interview, you can prioritize one that you know is going to get a bigger listenership. But I think, I guess on one hand, it is true that like all publicity is good publicity and that. But when we have limited time and resources, I think maybe sometimes you might say like, look, that isn't going to be, and you can obviously just be like, no, that's not worth it. You can refuse politely. But I think sometimes we've had to do that, to just be like, actually, this isn't going to be worth the payoff, basically.
I've got another one. I was contacted by a local reporter, and he wanted to do an article for Bucks Life. And I said, after I'd yabbered on for ages, and he was just listening, and I said, will you send me the draft of what you've written, just so I can make sure you've heard what I said correctly? He said, no, we don't do that. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, like, I guess what you need to do is at the beginning, maybe ask them, like, so was it like they rang you informally, or was this a kind of they set up an interview?
Yes, they rang me informally and set up a time to when he could spend time asking me questions.
Yeah, it depends. So they can do that. I guess you can say sometimes like, this is off the record, or are you recording this now? Is this? Some people will, like, I have had people let me look at stuff, especially times where I've been talking for like 45 minutes, like, God, I don't know what so I guess that's a good question then to ask beforehand, maybe, like, and then they might say no, but I guess then you can make a decision based on that. I can see why some people don't want to do it in case, I can understand where they're coming from, but I know what you mean. It is frustrating if you're kind of thought, like, I was just having a conversation, I was in flow, and now I'm, but I guess, that's a good thing to kind of maybe clarify at the beginning.
Yeah, I think one from me, Christina. Thanks very much. Really interesting, the breadth of topics you've covered. I was just thinking about the radio interviews and Sheila's point about not getting feedback. And I mean, I've listened to the radio a lot, and I don't think I've ever contacted the radio station or any of the people who've been presenting. And yet those, a lot of what I've heard influences me a lot. So just sort of a general point, I guess, is that possibly we influence people quite a bit with doing a radio show or anything else like that. But I would still agree with your points about, what's your audience, what's your key messaging, and making sure you've got 3 key points, for instance, to get across.
Yeah, because I guess that comes back to, I was saying at the beginning, of like, what are you using it for? So you might find every time we've done radio, we've never gotten a big response. So then if your goal is to get more volunteers, it might make more sense to do like some sponsored target ads on Facebook or something. We'll talk about that next. But so like, it might be more that that makes you think, like, what exactly do I want to get from this? And and how is that the best way to do it, kind of?
Or maybe we need to think about what to do as a follow-up. If we do an interview, on the basis that may not get a lot of positive response, but if we follow up with something on social media or in the local paper, then people will have heard it on the radio and read it in the paper, for instance, and they might then respond. I don't know. Have you sort of adopted those sort of approaches with a series of different types of events?
Yeah, so even, for example, recently feedback was on the BBC charity appeals, and Sheila Dillon was our host, and then like we got a good response from that, but obviously because the point is for people to donate, there's a very clear direct ask. But we have then also been able to use, like, Sheila shared stuff from us a lot, and it's kind of become a bit of an ambassador. She's got quite a good following on Twitter. So I think maybe I could be, if you have a good rapport with the interviewer and they've got a good following, that could be a way of kind of, yeah, bringing it, so not everyone that just listened on the radio, you can kind of say, like, we were making these points on the radio in case you missed it or something, and tag in the person who was hosting it or something, and that can be a way.
Yes, I heard Sheila Dillon do that appeal the week feedback. So yes, I was impressed by it. So,
yeah, it went really well. It was a good relief in the end. It took a good bit of time, but yeah, she was really good. So
the other question I had was in asking, meetings at council events or things like that. There was how should one try to target questions? Because I had one recently. It was to do with climate change, and asking a question saying that I was impressed by what they were doing, and then led on to a question about how they would then develop. And the councillor just latched on to what they'd been doing and thanked me for supporting it and rather than addressing the other points. So is it better to try to focus on just a single point, do you think?
So is this at a public event? Or was this like
it was.
I'm like, do we have public events?
Yeah, I mean, it was the community. What do they call them? The local the meetings for the local council. Community board. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it was open. This was one for everyone, open to members of the public. Yeah.
I think what I tried to do in those is to have like a very specific question that they kind of have to have a very clear answer to. So like once I was talking to this person about fish stuff, and they were like, if someone wasn't doing the stuff properly, they would have to leave the Fisheries Improvers Programme. And then I went, how many people have ever left the Fisheries Improvers Programme? And the answer is 0. So to me, that kind of showed that, like, they say this, if they weren't up to scratch, they'd have to leave. But the reality so far is no one's had to leave. So, so I think, yeah, sometimes if you can try to put the question, it's tough if the person just avoids the question, like you were saying. I don't know if there's the option of repeating it again. But yeah, I think having it very specific. So it's like, I'm asking you for a specific thing. And because either they then maybe have to say they either don't know the answer. So if you were asking someone about, say, how much food waste there was at, like, in the council, they either don't know, which doesn't look good, or maybe they do know and it's really high or something. So I think sometimes you kind of want to do the opposite of what we were saying when you're in an interview and you're trying to, like, pivot and answer it. You want to try ask a question that makes it harder for them to do that, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Christina.
Is that you in the chat, Becca? Or?
Yeah, it was just really, do you write things differently for sort of print than you would for web-based stuff? Because I know now, I mean, back in the day, you could write your press release, which was like a mini article, put everything in it, and then just print it word from word. But now, obviously, with more web-based sort of publications, is there a different way of writing that would be suited better and get more attention for that?
Not really. We don't tend to do that. I would say it's more if you're targeting a very specific outlet. So say, like, there might be some food media that they would really want, like, nice images of food or something, if you're, so I think it's more that there might be certain places, and it's good to look at what they've done before and that you might want to target it a bit more to them. But I don't think you have to do a separate one for web and print. Charmaine?
Yeah, sorry, I just had a quick question about blogs. Do you think that it is good to write blogs and also guest blog, but for free? Because that's my thing, because I have been asked a few times to do blogs, but it always seems to be for free. And I'm thinking, well, is that a good precedent to set? Because everybody be wanting free then, won't they? And I'll be feeling too guilty to charge after a while.
Yeah, it's tough because I've done a mix of both at feedback, and I think it comes back to similar what we're saying about interviews, and that like, is it a good platform so you think it's worth it? I also think it depends on who the organization is. Like if it's a small organization, then you want to support them. But if it's like a big company and you know they can afford to pay you, that's a bit different. And I actually had an experience like this last week where this random PR company wanted to talk to you about food waste. They were like, can we talk to you for half an hour to an hour? And I was like, I can do half an hour, but beyond that, you would have to like pay us. And then they literally replied and were like, we'll give you 250 quid for an hour. And I was like, I think because we all work in charities and social enterprises, we don't realize how much money is out there, and sometimes and I used to never ask for money, but now I'm like, well, so it's within reason, and like that depends on the context, but I think it's totally okay to ask. And like we've created a policy, so even in the last event we had with Becca, the Cultivating Conversations event, where all the speakers got paid, and we've created a policy at Feedback now that we pay speakers if they're from smaller organizations and stuff and doing it at their own time. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a juggling act, but I do think it can be a slippery slope doing stuff for free.
Yeah, that's a good point to ask, because I think that's another thing as well. You do forget to sort of just put the question out there in the ether to them, don't you? Sort of.
And I think it can be good to ask, because even if they say no, it's good for it to be on someone's radar that, oh, actually maybe we do need to consider paying people. Because even if it's 50 quid, it's not a massive amount of money, but it makes a difference if you're writing a couple of things a week that you have, and
thanks a lot, that's good, brilliant, thanks.
To use social media, I would probably, if I was putting it on social media, take the key points from a press release as opposed to maybe put the whole press release up there, and either create a few short posts or like a short video or something that's just getting those key things across. So I would or if you have a quote from the press release, like you could put that over an image or something. I think that would be the best way. And if you have a website, then you could try maybe tweak the press release a bit so it reads a bit easier, like a blog or something, and put it on the website and link to that from social.
Have you got any good sort of word limits for different styles of writing that's effective?
I always think for like a standard blog, probably like about 500, 600 words, like trying to keep it short. But again, it depends, because I feel like at the moment you see quite a lot of long reads as well. And it will say up the top, like, this is an 8-minute read. But so I think it just depends on knowing what it is. So if it's like, I just want to promote this event, and I can do that in a few hundred words, and I don't need to talk about everything else going on in Box right now. But maybe it's a much more technical issue, like something really like that you really want to get a point across about food insecurity, and you're like, I can't do this justice in a few hundred words. And we started doing it at Feedback, and I've seen a lot of media do it more. It's like I'm doing an audio recording then as well. I think you did one for us, Becca, of some of the blogs. So, and I've actually started listening to some, so it's almost kind of like a podcast then, a bit different, of like the New Yorker is doing that at the moment, where you can listen to, so it might take 20 minutes to listen, but I might do that while I'm cooking or something rather than reading it. So I think, it just depends a bit on the context. So and thinking about how much, but I think as a general rule, probably shorter is better.
I'm just wondering how many people actually read the written word so much now, because I never get a paper.
I actually don't. I don't actually know what I read. Yeah, I think it varies. Yeah, and I think it varies across demographics a lot as well. So I think that's why I kind of put in that question, like, where do you get your news from? Because if you want to target young people, you might want to go a different route than my grandmother doesn't have the internet, bless her. Like, so it depends. It depends on who you're trying. Exactly, like who you're trying to reach and stuff. But I think a lot of people, I think the Daily Mail is still the most read newspaper, whether we like it or not. But
Do you think there's still need for sort of printed stuff? So when it comes to flyers or posters, is that still something that is worthwhile doing, or is, I mean, a lot of people just put things up on social media or Facebook, Instagram. Is that still a good way to get people's attention, or is it something that we should try and avoid because of, you know, wasting paper and that sort of thing?
I think because it feels like such a long time since we've had an event because of COVID. So we've done different things for different events. I think it can be good if you're trying to reach a different, so, you know, if I put something on our Facebook, we're kind of reaching similar people, although we could do ads to target different people. But if we're trying to do an event and we want a more wider range of people to come, I think trying to, you know, get people on the street can be quite a good way of maybe bringing new people in. And a flyer for something like that might be useful because someone obviously doesn't necessarily want to stop and talk to you so I guess it's trying to be then though targeted. And, you know, if you, I've never actually been to Buckinghamshire, hopefully I'll get to come post COVID, but you know, a place where you know there's going to be a lot of foot traffic at a certain time, and you go with the flyers then. So, because I've definitely been at events where we've kind of just like left flyers on tables and known at the back of our head that they were probably going to get thrown away. So, and I also think posters, like a really nicely designed poster that you can put in a community halls or something that you know probably a lot of people are going to pass, that can be quite a good way as well.
I used to do notices on the adverts on bus stops, you know, the big whatever, A0, or on the tab on buses. I mean, I don't know, because I haven't been driving about. I just wonder whether you do that sort of thing anymore. It has to be a punchy message for people to read. But if it's like the A40, there's always people driving up and down the A40. Is it worthwhile using that sort of quick spot it as the driving by?
Yeah, I guess I think what the message is. I'm just laughing because last week I walked past this big billboard that had, for a new delivery service, that had gelato in the picture, and I came home and ordered it. So I'm like, yes, it works. But I guess that had a very clear thing. It was like, download this app, get this ice cream. So, you know, I think if it's an event and it's like lots of info, you know, the event's on here and it's about this, but if it's, I don't know, it's a much clearer thing, then that might work. So I think it depends, I guess, what it is. Because yeah, you're right, you're only going to see it very briefly, very quickly. So it has to be something that the point can get across, and that people don't need to read a lot of information to kind of get what you're trying to say to them.
Because I was thinking for the 1 month social media to get Urban Harvest on people's agenda, as to whether it's worth, you know, instead of printing anything or doing leaflets, to actually just do a bus stop or a bus advert. I don't know.
Yeah, that could work. So you basically just want people to report, like, to contribute to a kind of map about where they're
yes,
yeah. And how do they do it? Do they do it online or through it?
Did you try the line, Becca? Did it work for you?
What was that, the map?
Yes.
I haven't yet, so yeah.
It should be open to people to go onto the map and add their own bits of fruit as to what it is, if it's elderflower or plum or...
Because I guess if you could have a QR code on the poster that brings people straight to that might be quite good.
Yeah.
Or even if you know where a lot of the fruit trees are and can target it, so you put posters kind of in that area or something. I see there's a question in the chat about influencers. How do influencer locally to push? I honestly think a lot of it is you just have on influencers do some research, like go on Instagram or Google and see who's got a lot of followers and see who's interacting. We were looking at doing this pet food campaign for a while, so I was literally Googling like celebrities with dogs and seeing if any of them talked about their dogs, and I was like, if anyone looks at my search history. On the who best to avoid, I think that's hard without, I think it's just kind of, I tend to get that from word of mouth. So if you're part of a network like that, maybe it's in an informal way, you can ask, like, have you worked with this person before? I don't really know if there's kind of any other way you'd figure that out, but yeah, you might. And I also think that in a way we're similar to what we were on about earlier about whether something's worth your time. Like we've definitely had someone before who wanted to come on a glean, but then they'd only come on the glean if we were gleaning organic produce and all these other stipulations, and it ended up being just like too much work for us for how big their blog was. So I think it's a bit of that as well, as like, you know, it can be useful, but you don't want to have to be like jumping, you know, through hoops for the person necessarily either, depending on who they are. And I think some of that is you can just maybe get a feel from talking, you know, from talking to them, how they're, and you know, sometimes you might work with someone and then afterwards be like, okay, never again. But that's just, I guess, a bit of trial and error. Yeah.
Just want to, it must be the, maybe this is a really stupid question, but
sure,
I just want to ask that question. So nowadays I'm researching about marketplace. Okay. Is there any way to figure it out, this particular forum, and develop a marketplace? What we are selling or what we are offering, and people can find out us.
So you're selling particular products, you mean, or?
Yeah. Let's say there are a couple of organizations right now in this particular forum we have. So we are selling some product. Let's say classes we are selling. Okay, and we are selling skills. Come to the community alignment, get the skill, that's the skill part. Okay, so then a whole organization as a marketplace we are offering, and everybody can jump into it. Let's say I just want to buy the pair of shoes, then I am going to the marketplace to buy. So same way, I did the research, but I haven't found any charity organization or community enterprises or get together and having individually we are selling. But when I'm, let's say someone wants to get the teaching, gardening, how to get the, of course they will find out particular, but when they're going there, then they can say how to cook that. Okay, they can go to Kepira. Then they can get, you talk about the waste food, then they can come to us. So is there any way to link all together as a marketplace? Just maybe this stupid question. I just
no, I don't know. I would. So do you have the Bucks Facebook page, right, Becca? But there's not a Bucks Food Partnership website, or is there?
Not yet. Not
yeah,
yet. So
I guess something like that would be, and then maybe you put it in a way that like the menu is like, what do you want? And it's either like, I want to learn how to cook, I want to learn how to garden, and it takes people directly to that. Yeah. Because yeah, otherwise it's tough to kind of bring all the different groups together, I guess.
I guess there is, for example, I know for Aylesbury Market, they've actually got a Facebook page, or it's a group where people have stalls. So they have a number, their stall is a number, and they can sort of advertise things that they're selling. I don't know if there's anything like that in Wickham, or if it's just something that Aylesbury Market have done whilst they've not been able to have a market. They've gone sort of a bit more virtually. But I don't know if there's anything like that in Wickham. I don't know if Charmaine, if you've got any ideas.
No, best of my knowledge, no.
Yeah, I think
we have freebies. There are plenty of freebies, Facebooks, and each village, sort of Mickleffield, we have Llanedd, we have Sands, we have, and a freebie Facebook.
Selling.
And it's a close and selling. And I just wondering whether we can have a sort of that. At least then, let's say you are going to Marks and Spencer, then eat like super stories and building, everything is there. And sort of if there is a place, marketplace, then they can achieve and people can find out, figure it out, rather than going and Google and type in different words and region. And if they want to find out, then whole over the country. And this we are publishing ourselves, and these are the services we are providing or product we are providing, and people can buy online, and so we can link each other. So rather than, of course, this is a really valuable discussion forum right now I'm engaging, and it's just going forward. How can we do that? And we all are having a different knowledge and skills level, and put together. I don't need to write a press release and this is the marketplace, just put one and very simplistic. Can't we do that? This is 2021 and a new way of doing things, and we have to be pretty much progressive, I guess. And can't we tap that part? And I'm just wondering.
There is, sorry, there's going to be feedback. Thanks. Thanks, Becca. There is something around that, something where we want to build the network so that it actually pulls together, you know, where we have resource and capacity to support different organisations. So there's sort of like the word of mouth, isn't there? So with Marketplace, everyone knows it's on at this time, this is where you go, and everyone can help signpost each other to what's available. So I think the closest place or the closest thing that might work on that basis would be networking through the local food groups. So Wickham has their local action food group, Aylesbury has one, and then there's going to be one for Chiltern and South Bucks. And I think through each of those networks, they're wanting the community board coordinators to understand, you know, what's happening on the ground so that they may be able to then support and share, you know, information about what's happening, so they can help with the press release, they can help to circulate, you know, these are the events, these are the things that are going on in particular areas, but also to link it up so Aylesbury would know what's happening in Wickham. You know, each local food group would be able to understand what's happening across the different parts of the county. So even if you're selling something in Wickham and you want, you know, local people to understand what it is that you're offering, if you then decide, actually, we have our website, we want to sell some things online, or, you know, we want people to know what we're doing, then that might then help to maximize how you can link with other similar groups, or people doing similar things in Aylesbury, or, you know, similar things in Buckingham, and it might then help to support your activity, you know, grow, or to sort of get better recognition of what it is that you're doing in the way that you're doing it. So I think that's maybe one way that can be developed. So those local food groups are going to be beyond just emergency food, but to look at the whole of the food system, looking at all the different aspects of it. So it will be important to make sure that there's a balance there. So it's something worth raising, I think, because then if you raise it, then we can hear it, and then we can make sure that it's covered, it's dealt with, or it's addressed in some way.
Yeah, I suppose we'd put the apple and pear juice that we've created from the Urban Harvest on something like that, because selling is not my thing, and they're in my garage at the moment, and I could really do with recouping the cost of producing the apple and pear juice. So yes, that shanty would be a good medium for pushing, you know, low sales numbers out there. Yeah.
So that's the reason, and everybody do have our own resources, but we are happy to share, but there are plenty of barriers to share as well, and the trust and the understanding, which it is really difficult to develop. Partnerships are all right, and coordination, networking, everything all right. They are really fancy words, but when it's come to practicality in the physical aspect, it's pretty hard.
Yeah, I guess it'd be quite nice for us if we shared excess seedlings, which you'll be getting, you know, April, May, June, where you've grown too many lettuce and you want to move them on or something. Might be quite nice as a local group to share where you've got excesses.
We can do,
or maybe you can create a hamper or something. I think they're like one of our projects in Liverpool. They're now working with it got set up in first lockdown. I think it's called LIDS, like Liverpool Independent Delivery Services, and then you can go on and it's like all different independent groups, but then they'll do stuff like a kind of Easter hamper, so you can have, you know, things from different people. I don't know if something like maybe that would work.
I'm thinking of the seedlings before they've even grown into something edible. And when on my own allotment, we've got a table and we'll put anything spare on there, and walkers going by can pick them up and go and grow them in their own garden at home. So it's a, you know, it's a very local way of contacting people, just on a spot where, you know, lots of people walk past. And people like walking around allotments. We get people just come and walk through the allotment, because we've got a gate at each end, and they will literally just walk through the allotments. And if you ever ask them, you know, are they looking for an allotment? They say, no, we always come up here and have a walk through. We like looking at it. So, you know, it would be quite nice, as you're saying, to share any spare little seedlings that you've got, or put it on a local group.
I know on Facebook they had some. They had, over the Christmas period, I was doing some hampers on the High Wycombe. Yeah, it was the High Wycombe Christmas market.
Yeah.
People paid £5 a stall, and you could post once a day your products and wares, or what have you. That's what they had been doing. So I don't know if there's something similar that could happen for Wycombe. It's similar to what Becca was saying was happening in Aylesbury. But yeah, maybe a community focused one.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So are there any other questions?
No, don't think so.
As I say, if there is anything around sort of social media, so that will be covering sort of the, I think it was for sort of Facebook, maybe Instagram, sort of video stuff, as well as images and content. So if there is anything that sort of springs to mind, you know, over the next week, then do chuck me an email, and I'll send that over to Christina so she's able to respond for the session next week.
Yeah.
So if there's anything that you need.
Thank you. That was really good. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah.
No worries. I look forward to trying all the juice and various other things whenever I make it to box.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And if there's no more questions, then enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. It's been brilliant. Bye.